Hello everyone and welcome to our KAI 2020 talk. This is Yasmeen Abdrabou from the University of Bundeswehr Munich. Together with Mohamed Khamis from the University of Glasgow, we will be presenting our KAI 2020 work, The Role of Eye Gaze in Security and Privacy Applications, Survey and Future HCI Directions. This work is with the collaboration of University of Patras and Human Opsis. Eye trackers have been used since a long time, and security researchers were among the early adopters of this technology. As you can see on the right, eye password system was introduced by Komar and colleagues in 2007, where the interface allowed the users to enter their password by gazing on the keys and confirming it by pressing a space button. Since then, eye tracking has come a long way, and it's continuously being used in various security applications. This figure shows the number of publications from the year 2000 till 2018 that focused on using eye tracking for security applications. You can see that there is a significant increase in the past period. This graph is based on the publications at different conferences, including HCI, computer vision, eye tracking, and security, and we also included journals. Eye tracking has been used in the HCI community since the late 80s. But only recently it started to become ubiquitous. Nowadays, you can get a laptop with integrated eye tracker, as you can see on the left side. Not only laptops, but also smart devices such as iPhone X and Samsung comes with front-facing depth camera that actually works very well. And now you can download some apps that use eye tracking as well. In this work, we contribute a state-of-the-art survey in eye tracking and security applications. We classify the work based on gaze utility into 3 application areas: authentication, privacy protection, and finally improving security based on gaze behavior. I will give examples on each of them as we go. We also highlight 8 HCI research directions, but due to time limitations, I will only explain 4 of them, and you can find the rest in the paper. Finally, we highlight some challenges that hinder the uptake of gaze-based security applications. So let's take a look at each of those application areas. The first one is authentication, and it can be further split into explicit authentication, implicit authentication, and gaze-supported multi-factor authentication. The second application area is privacy protection, which can be further split into active visual privacy protection and raising the user's awareness of observers. The last application area is improving security based on gaze behavior. So let's start with the first application area, which is authentication. There are 3 subcategories here. Starting with explicit authentication, the user has to perform an action to authenticate. For example, the user has to move their eyes to enter a password. In implicit authentication, the system is authenticating the users while they are moving their eyes normally. So the user is not intentionally authenticating, and this is usually referred to as biometric authentication. The last one is multi-factor authentication, where authentication is considered as a combination of 2 or more schemes, and gaze is one of them. Out of those subcategories, today we will talk about explicit authentication. Explicit authentication can be further split based on the type of password symbols users enter, and also the number of modalities used. Explicit authentication can employ legacy-based symbols or gaze-based password symbols. So what does this mean? Existing password schemes that are used in today's systems, such as PINs and alphanumeric passwords, can actually be entered by gaze, and that is legacy passwords. While on the other side, gaze-based passwords contain eye movements as part of the password itself, such as moving your eyes left and right to enter a symbol. It can also include following a certain moving target with your eyes. Advantages of legacy passwords are that they are actually easier to integrate with existing systems. But the challenge here is that it can add cognitive load to the user to actually understand the mapping between the gaze and the symbols entered. Also, work in this area showed that many of the existing work is slower. On the other hand, gaze-based passwords. One of the advantages is that they expand the password space by incorporating new sets of password symbols. However, they can also have a steeper learning curve, as users are not used to them. And also, there is an uncertainty of their memorability. This actually brings us to the first research direction, as there is a huge uncertainty of how people select and recall gaze-based passwords, and this is one area of future work. Another way to classify explicit authentication is based on the number of modalities used. In Unimodal authentication schemes, like the ones here on the left, the user is using their eye gaze as the only modality for authentication. So for example, here in iPen, the user has to dwell on each digit for a couple of milliseconds to select them, because the system has to differentiate between selecting an object and perceiving it. On the other hand, in multimodal authentication schemes, what happens is that gaze is used alongside other modalities for authentication. So for example, in this case, gaze is used with touch input, while here, gaze is used with mid-air gestures. Unimodal schemes are generally slower, but on the positive side, they are more suitable for people who have motor disabilities. Or when touch input is not desired. For example, if you want to interact with ATM without touching it, like nowadays in the COVID-19 pandemic. The multimodal authentication schemes are usually faster, but it's difficult to communicate to users that they actually need to use multiple modalities and how to combine their usages. While evaluating gaze-based authentications, researchers focused on usability, memorability, and security. Usability includes matrices like efficiency, efficacy, and error tolerance, and memorability included things like password recall time, while security focused on password space, the accuracy of the attacks, and also the number of guesses until the attack is successful. But the problem now is that the majority of these evaluations has been done in the lab, but now we have the hardware that allows us to do the studies in the wild. And this can actually allow us to answer existing questions like the memorability of gaze-based passwords and also how fast people can enter them over time. And also if there is a learning curves effect similar to other modalities or it's different for eye movement, for example.
So far, we've been talking about authentication. The second application area is privacy protection using eye gaze. And the first subcategory there is active visual privacy protection. Eye tracking can be used to allow private interactions. So for example, in iDrop and also in Pocket Transfer, these systems allow people to transfer content or news articles, for example, from displays to personal devices. And using eye tracking actually allows users to transfer articles inconspicuously, so others around them would not know which articles they transferred. And this is not the case when using a modality such as touch, for example, where it's clear to everybody what you are interacting with. Also, eye tracking has been used for voting in public space because it allows people to vote without others knowing what they chose. Similarly, for typing, people could use eye tracking for typing, and this would allow input to be hard to observe by others. The second category is privacy protection using eye gaze by raising the user's awareness of observers. So in this work here by Ali et al., what they did is that they used head pose estimation, which is an approximation for eye gaze, to determine if somebody is looking at your phone screen. And when this happens, the system alerts you that somebody is shoulder surfing you. So actually, if you can detect the eye gaze of the user, you can also detect the eye gaze of people that are around them. And this could be used to protect privacy as shown here in this figure on the right. For example, you could hide the content around the point that the user is looking at when somebody is observing them to protect their privacy. Because otherwise, if you employ such a method here, like iSpot the whole time, it will impact usability negatively. But then if you employ it only when an observer is around, then it reduces the impact on usability. Actually, there is a lack of work on employing eye tracking for privacy protection in this way by assessing the gaze of bystanders, for example. So this is an area where further research can be done. This concludes privacy protection using eye tracking. Now the third area is application area 3, improving security based on gaze behavior. Tracking the user's gaze while they are undertaking security-critical tasks could allow us to understand the user's behavior in response to security indicators. And this has also been done in the past, actually. It also allows us to improve behavior against phishing emails, because actually you can tell if the user is stressed through their eye movements and pupil dilations and so on. And this could be an indicator that a user that is reading an email could be actually under a social engineering attack or a phishing attack. It also allows exploring the user's attitude towards privacy policies and also improve graphical authentication schemes. I will show you an example of that in a bit. But first, actually, this is also another area that is under investigated, understanding gaze behavior in security tasks. Although there is a lot of opportunities there, this is an area that requires further research. For example, you can use eye tracking to see if people actually notice security indicators when viewing websites, as done in this work over here. Another way to improve security based on gaze behavior is to nudge the user towards more secure behavior by understanding them first through their eye movements. So for example, in this work by Bulling et al., they improved picture-based passwords where normally you would pick points on a picture to set your password. They improved it by applying saliency masks. Saliency masks tell us where people are likely to stare the most in a picture like that, and this helps us identify the hotspots. So the hotspots in this picture are the ones in red here, and these are the points that attract attention the most, and thereby these are the points that people are more likely to pick for their password. So this way, you could encourage people to pick stronger passwords by ensuring that they don't pick from these areas which are commonly used and result in weaker passwords. There are also future challenges that require further research. And one of the challenges is the trade-off between accuracy and speed. So most eye tracking systems require a calibration procedure. So calibration is a process where mappings between eye movements and positions on the screen are collected, and this is used to improve the accuracy of the system so that it would know exactly where you're looking. But the problem is that although it improves accuracy, it actually slows the interaction process. So imagine if you have to calibrate an eye tracker every time you want to unlock your mobile phone or your computer device. It would be frustrating and it would impact usability negatively. So one direction for future work is to try to achieve a balance between calibration time and accuracy. So do we actually need to calibrate every time? There are also calibration-free mechanisms. But they also have their drawbacks, so there is more work that needs to be done in this area. The second challenge is that although we've been talking about using eye tracking to improve security and privacy, actually eye tracking in itself has privacy implications. So imagine if I have an eye tracker on my phone and I can track the eyes of a person sitting next to me. Then I could tell lots of things about them. So you can identify mental disorders, for example, through eye movements, or health problems, or also visual interests. So there has to be secure ways of processing gaze data and storing them. And also people have to be aware if their eye tracking data is being collected and aware of what could be done with it. And this is also an under-investigated area to investigate the privacy implications of pervasive eye tracking and developing mechanisms to protect everybody from eye tracking as well. So to conclude, gaze is very promising for security applications. We've discussed authentication, privacy protection, and improving security based on user behavior. There has been a lot of work on authentication using eye gaze, but relatively less on the other two areas. So this is actually a call to put more effort in these areas because they're very promising and there's a lot that could be done there still. Also, there are a lot of questions that could be answered by doing gaze-based authentication studies in the wild. So now is the time to do that because we now have the hardware and the mechanisms that allow us to do studies in the wild and outside of the lab, unlike the majority of previous work. Finally, the ubiquity of eye tracking can itself be a threat to privacy, and this threat is relatively under-investigated and requires further research. Thank you very much for listening. This was Mohamed Khamis.